Well, hello, Don. Welcome to Chip and Co.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here on your small screen.
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you so much for your time and being willing to speak with us here today. I'm beyond thrilled to be able to meet someone as talented as yourself. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's get started. So I have to share, I have had the immense pleasure of growing up watching your films and having these stories featured in Howard impact my life in ways that I can never even begin to describe. I've only truly recently begun to scratch the surface of the filmmaking process and really see the blood, love, sweat, and tears that go into storytelling. And as the writer, director, executive producer of Howard for Disney Plus, it's obvious that you're passionate about sharing Howard's story. Why was this the right time to feature Howard's story?
Well, we lost Howard about 30 years ago, if you can believe that. He died in the early part of 1991. And so enough time had passed where I felt like people were willing to speak honestly about his history and life. They still remembered his history and life well. And I think if we waited too much longer, I was afraid the story would get lost. And it was an important story to tell, not just for the kind of geek in me, I guess is the right word, who wanted to know more about Howard, because I worked with him and, I knew him, but I knew him like any coworker. You think you know him, but you don't.
Yeah.
And so it was fascinating to dig into his life. But I also wanted it to be told just for inspiration, because so much of Howard's story is inspiring, and he did so many things well. And so by telling his story, that's really my hope, is that people don't forget him.
It's a great way to honor his memory.
Yeah, I hope so. And it started out as about 4 years ago. I had lunch with his sister. And there was no agenda. We just had lunch. And about halfway through my cheeseburger, I said, I think I'll make a movie about Howard. And it was really that kind of impulsive. It would be like if we were sitting here and I would say, gee, I'm going to, make a movie about Teddy Roosevelt. It was very somewhat impulsive. But then again, I had been thinking about it for a long time. And if you remember, about 10 years ago, I made a movie called Waking Sleeping Beauty that's all about kind of the renaissance of animation at Disney. And there's a big chunk of Howard in that movie. And I always thought there's so much more to tell. So I started to dig in, just took baby steps and looked at the story, and it became obvious pretty soon that there was a really wonderful story to tell there about a really talented man who was, vulnerable and learned his craft and knew everything about musical theater and contributed so much to Disney animation.
Oh, and I do have to say, I've watched it several times now, and not even just in preparation, but it's just such an inspiring story. And I found a few connections myself. I reside currently about 45 minutes north of Baltimore. So that was like, oh, hey, that's a fun tidbit. We're kind of in the same area for that. But one of the things for me that's like as shared in the film Howard, he worked on many projects, including the feature titles like Little Shop of Horrors, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, which you were a part of, and Aladdin. These films and musicals have brought so much joy to generations of fans and have inspired animated sequels, television series, Broadway adaptations, and now live action films. Do you think Howard had any idea that his work would have such a lasting impact on film and television?
I don't know. I would guess he hoped that it would. But there certainly was nothing like streaming television like we have now. There was no Disney Plus on the horizon. And he had become a little disengaged with Broadway. And so he found in animation a place where he could really stretch himself and exercise his craft. And he found people that he could really enjoy working with. Because all in all, animation is a pretty collegial, fun bunch of people. We make cartoons for a living. So the egos are reasonable, and usually everybody understands it's collaborative. You can't look at Beauty and the Beast and say, oh, that's Don Hahn's movie. It's not. It's a collaboration between so many amazing people, whether they're animators or musicians or painters or voice artists. And that's what makes animation kind of fun, is that kind of group collaborative. And it's what I've always enjoyed about it. And is pulling that group together and trying to have everybody rally around the same story. Mm-hmm. So Howard may or may not have, I'm sure he wanted those stories to last. Mm-hmm. And those were very lasting stories when we came across them. I mean, Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and Mermaid, those are centuries old stories already that have brought a lot of joy to generations long before you and I. But Howard and the people I worked with were very clever because they retold them in a really different way. So instead of saying, well, Hans Christian Andersen, that's very Danish, so let's set this in Denmark, A Little Mermaid in the harbor in Copenhagen. No, it's like, no, let's set it in the Caribbean. We'll make it Jamaican. And, okay, that's different. And it catches your attention and it allows you to tap into all that great music, which is far more rhythmic and interesting. The same with Little Shop of Horrors. Let's take 50s girl group rock and roll and put it with this Roger Corman monster movie. Well, that's the most unlikely mashup you would ever think of. But that's what makes it interesting. And I think as an audience, it catches our attention, but it also allows Howard to adapt those stories in really interesting different ways.
Well, and speaking of it being a group effort, Howard's family and friends are such an integral part of sharing who he was as a person, both before and after his success. How did it feel to hear some of their most intimate stories and memories of Howard?
Well, it's as you can imagine, it's as a filmmaker, it's interesting. I had known these people for 25 or 30 years, so it's not like most of them I had known. But still, to go into a room with Howard's sister or with his partner, Bill, and ask questions that are, in some sense, personal, about Howard's loss or about Howard's process or about Howard's life, his outlook on life, it is very vulnerable for the person you're questioning. And you want to try to build a trust with the person you're interviewing. And it's funny, I decided early on I would do it without cameras, and do it just as audio interviews. And that's part of the reason is because once you introduce cameras, you introduce hair and makeup and lights and things that intimidate people. Yeah. And so they either clam up a little bit or don't share as freely. And one of the wonderful things is when you don't have those things in the room, it's just people open up and they forget they're being recorded. Like right now, I have no idea I'm being recorded. But you do forget it. You just talk. And I'm a good listener, and I was so thankful that those people shared their thoughts with me. When I spent an hour and a half with Jodie Benson talking about Howard, Paige O'Hara, the same thing. And to hear their stories, each one's a movie, to be honest. There's a Jodie Benson movie to be had. They're wonderful, heartfelt, sometimes tragic stories that they tell. And then as a filmmaker, you stitch those together into a narrative to try to capture this man's life in 90 minutes. Yeah.
Well, and with that whole, that time limit, I'm sure there are stories and moments that you wish you could have added to this. And what are some of those that maybe they didn't make the final cut, but you wish you could have found a home for them?
Well, Howard was so deeply into musical theater from a young age, which you can kind of tell if you watch the movie. So he, for example, he wrote and directed Snow Queen in Indiana University when he was back there. Well, you could expand and put, much more about that. How interesting. I mean, Snow Queen was somewhat the basis for Frozen at Disney. Yeah. And so you think, well, what would have that been? Well, that was a whole story. There's nights in the theater. I ran across about 2 hours of tape that was recorded with Howard when he was just becoming ill and he was just reminiscing about his life. That 2 hours is something that everybody should hear because it's part of its, just the drudgery of everyday life. We went to rehearsals here, we had lunch over here, I had a tuna sandwich there. And then every once in a while, he'll talk about a play he went to or something horrible he saw or a great movie he saw or a wonderful dinner he had with somebody. And those are the things that put flesh on the bones of him as a personality. And you also hear in those tapes the struggles. All of his relationships and all of his projects were not smooth. Mm-hmm. And he was a very, it's a very odd thing because he was a warm, big-hearted, generous man. but prickly at times and opinionated and forceful,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. So if you had an opinion about something, about how a piece of story should be told, you had better be prepared to understand that, and if you didn't like it, to push back.
Mm-hmm.
So those were stories that were interesting, and not all of them can make it into a movie, but those kinds of, sometimes angry, sometimes hilarious stories are the ones that are, you wish you could put them all in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. One of the things that I was surprised about, but it didn't feel unnatural, was that we got to feature Alan Menken, who, I mean, there's not a Disney fan out there who loves anything from the 90s that doesn't know that name. And I know he was, dear friends with Howard. I'm sure dear friends with you even up till today. And he was very vulnerable throughout the film and equally passionate about telling Howard's story in a very real and raw fashion. What made you decide to bring Alan in on the project, and how did he become the composer for the film?
Well, Alan was one of Howard's principal writing partners, and so it was interesting to not only tell the story about how he got involved with Howard and hear him tell it, which is pretty amusing in the film. And I have known Alan for a long time and feel really lucky to know him. He's surprisingly brilliant and surprisingly down to earth. He doesn't behave like a diva, and he absolutely could. I've worked with a lot of divas, so I'm experienced. But he has a gift that is very rare. I've run across very few people that have it, and that's the ability to write melodies that are deeply engaging, and that you get them in your ear and you can't get them out. Mm-hmm. And I remember going way back to when we used to get tapes in of Be Our Guest or Gaston's song. Mm-hmm. I would listen to them, and when I got them in my car, and I would play them again and again and again, because you just can't get enough of them. And Richard Sherman maybe has that same gift. And so, a lot of popular composers may have that gift. And then on top of it, he had this close relationship with Howard that again was productive and interesting, but at times difficult. Mm-hmm. And to have him tell that story was really important to me. Mm-hmm. How did he get to write the movie music was a weird thing. I had picked out a composer, really good composer. Documentaries are made on a shoestring. These are not $100 million movies. They're $100 movies.
Yeah.
And I made this movie independently of Disney. I didn't have any, financing or anything. So I was piecing it together with, chewing gum. And I sent it off to Howard to Alan to see it, just for notes, to see if I was telling the story accurately. And he came back after the weekend. He said, I looked at it and I decided I have to write the score for this. And I said, well, Alan, that's really nice, but I can't afford you. I can't, no. And he said, no, I'll do it. I just have to do this, because I think he saw it as his last chance to collaborate with Howard, and his last chance to express how he felt about Howard. And his music does that. His music is a storytelling vehicle for any filmmaker. Mm-hmm. So how lucky am I to be able to get that offer? And so he did. He went away and wrote the score, kind of a piano score for the whole thing. And then we brought in Chris Bacon, who's a great composer in his own right, to produce and kind of turn that into the score for the movie. So sometimes you have great luck on a film like this, and I think it's all because of Howard. If people want to rally around someone like that and help tell their story.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just it's kind of, not a send-off, because I don't think you guys will ever really be unaffected by Howard even through your lifetime, but just to be able to kind of write a love letter post everything of just like, we miss you, we love you, and
it was important. Exactly right. It was important to all of us to tell Howard's story. In fact, I only used people that were close to Howard in the movie. I didn't use any Broadway experts or journalists or professors of musical theater or pundits or anybody to give him some sort of retrospective. I really wanted to use people that were in the room where it happens, that they were there, mm-hmm. knowing Howard and having worked with him, or were part of his family, or were part of his personal life. And everyone in that movie speaks about Howard out of days, weeks, and years of personal experience with him. There's a lot of love in the air and a lot of authenticity and at times a lot of honesty about the tougher times.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it translates beautifully through Alan's music, through the words from the ones who cared about him most. It was very evident that this was a man who was, more than just a lyricist or a director or writer. He brought love with him and inclusion and helping to make people think about the work that they were outputting and to be proud of it. I think that's a huge message, especially at the time. I mean, Alan.
Yeah, that's really well said.
Yeah, well, and Alan Howard and yourself were crucial elements in what we refer to now as the Disney Renaissance, and helping to breathe new life into Disney animation. As stated, it had been moved, off of the main studio at the time, and all of this was happening as Howard was honestly battling for his own life. And do you believe that Howard knew he was helping to lay groundwork for the future of Disney films, and that way they could be so successful?
I have no way of knowing, but I know we didn't walk around at that time saying, wow, what a great renaissance we're having. You just don't. Yeah. As you can imagine, you're just worried about getting a particular movie done and making it good. So whether we were working on, pre-Howard on movies like Great Mouse Detective or whatever, or working with Howard on some of his films, you're just going day to day, problem by problem, and solving those problems and trying to get the movie to the highest level you can. Do you hope it'll? I personally never had the thought of, gee, I hope we can revive Disney animation. No, you hope you can do some good work, and you hope the audience will enjoy it. And that's what we all wanted, and that's why we all worked so hard together on it. And we were lucky that a few films in a row came together. And it was kind of that perfect storm, because you had a very young studio. You had guys and girls in their 20s and 30s. Mm-hmm. You had some new technology in computer graphics and the CAPS system that was helping to paint things. So there was a new artistic tool. There was new management in Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Peter Schneider. And then into that studio, that potential, came Howard and Alan. And it was like throwing a match into a gas tank. That was the final thing that helped it get over the top. Because when Howard's songs would come in, imagine you're sitting there trying to come up with ideas for your movie, and all of a sudden a tape arrives, and on it is the Belle song from Beauty and the Beast, and it's the opening 4 or 5 minutes, and it tells this whole story, and it sets you up as this wonderful, Broadway-style musical. That's a gift. There's no other way to describe it. And so when those songs came in, I remember Gary Trousdale, the director of Beauty and the Beast, worked on Little Mermaid before that, and he storyboarded Under the Sea. And he said it was so great because Howard would write out, the blowfish blows and the tuna plays this or whatever, and all I had to do was draw that. So the ideas were on the page. So that it was a great collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was able to just literally through that music bring the movie to life. It's like when you read a good book and it just plays before your eyes. I could only imagine how it must feel to hear what he had written, and it's like, okay, maybe we're stumped on the next thing, but then something in the music just reveals the right path, and that's just got to be a magic moment in filmmaking.
Yeah, when you hear, there's songs like "Kiss the Girl" in Little Mermaid, or whatever, that are they're romantic, they're light, they're Caribbean, they're sung by Sebastian, this Rastafarian crab. So it's really unconventional, but it makes you smile because it has a wink in it. It has a little tongue-in-cheek in it of how almost ridiculous it is, and yet how right it is, how it feels really right for that particular story.
Yeah. Well, I do only have one more question for you today, and my final question is, what lessons and messages do you hope that Disney Plus subscribers will take away from this honoring tribute of Howard and his legacy?
Well, it's a great question. I think I'm really happy it's on Disney Plus. There was never any guarantees that it would be. In fact, when I started it, there wasn't a Disney Plus. So they've been great partners for this movie, and they've really embraced it, because there's there's parts of the story that are difficult to tell. It's about a man who passes away during the middle of a AIDS crisis. But most of the story is a very joyful story about a man who lived an amazing life, had all the creative struggles that you and I have, and somehow broke through all that and left behind some amazing work in a really short period of time. I mean, from the time he started, God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, at the WPA Theater in New York, to the time he passed was, 10 years or less. So an amazing body of work, clever, interesting. And for the audience, I hope they take away that no matter what you faced in your life, and we all have challenges, all of us, whether it's personal or professional, or just the fear of being humiliated or whatever. Those are all things Howard faced. He wasn't a bulwark of strength every moment, but he was clear. He was a great communicator. He was clever. He knew his craft, and he persisted and worked really hard in the face of some really big obstacles. And hopefully that gives us some inspiration to work and press on in the face of some big obstacles also that we might face in our lives.
Very well said. I truly hope that the audience is just as touched and honestly moved to tears as I was watching Howard for the first time, second time, third time, and beyond. Thank you, Don, so much for your time today and your dedication to sharing Howard's story with us all. And I hope that you have a magical day.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure. You too.